up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon, North Korea is reportedly developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles that could potentially target U.S. bases in Alaska and Guam. Consumer sentiment in Korea rebounds on expectations. Government stimulus measures will help the economy fire on full cylinders soon. Plus, Israel and Palestinian militants agreed to a long-term ceasefire ending 7 weeks of fighting. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon. It's noon Wednesday, August 27th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this lunchtime. U.S. intelligence agencies have grave suspicions North Korea is building a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles.
The development adds to existing concerns about the missile and nuclear threat posed by the regime. Shin Se-min reports.
You're looking at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sitting atop of a Romeo-class submarine. The photos of Kim surfaced in June when he visited a naval unit of the Korean People's Army and, according to North Korean state media, conducted a drill and instructed the captain on navigation methods. His visit is part of North Korea's efforts to shore up the underwater operation capability of its submarines. And it seems the North is making inroads. U.S.-based media outlet Washington Free Beacon reports that U.S. Defense Intelligence agencies recently detected a previously unseen missile launch tube on a North Korean submarine. North Korea is reportedly developing a ballistic missile submarine that, if confirmed to be true, would significantly raise the threat posed by the nuclear-armed communist state. According to the report, U.S. intelligence shows Pyongyang is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. North Korea is also believed to have already obtained submarine-launched ballistic missiles from Russia. Pentagon spokesman Jeffrey Poole refused to comment on the report, saying he was not allowed to discuss matters of national intelligence. However, he did say the U.S. urges Pyongyang to be more transparent with its defense activities for the sake of regional peace. If the report is true and Pyongyang has developed its capability, the U.S. will have to look into strengthening its missile defense systems on the West Coast, as North Korea would be capable of hitting Alaska. U.S. bases in Japan, the Philippines, and Guam would also be well within range of a North Korean strike launch from waters in Asia. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The United States, meanwhile, has dismissed repeated calls by North Korea to halt its regular joint military drills with South Korea. The Pentagon's press secretary John Kirby says the exercises will continue, adding that Washington's alliance with Seoul remains steadfast and ironclad. He then urged Pyongyang to meet its international obligations. The U.S. official's comments come a couple of days after North Korea's deputy ambassador to the UN said the joint drill was a preparation for a nuclear attack against North Korea and that Pyongyang stands ready to use its nuclear weapons if necessary. Slowly but surely, the Korean economy appears to be recovering from the impact of April's ferry disaster. The index that measures the overall economic outlook of consumers has improved this month, inching closer to the level seen just before the tragedy. Hwang Jie tells us more.
The Bank of Korea says the Consumer Sentiment Index stood at 107 in August, up 2 points from a month earlier. The figure marks a rebound from July, suggesting that Korean consumers might be returning to the spending habits that were dented after April's ferry disaster. The index hovered at around the 108 level in the first 4 months of this year, but dropped to 105 in May following the disaster. The central bank says the improvement was spurred by a widely expected rate cut this month and government stimulus measures that were instituted by an economic team that took office last month. While indications are that consumer sentiment is improving, the August figure is still below the level posted before the ferry tragedy. A new survey from the central bank shows that more than 9 out of 10 companies in the service sector expect the negative impacts of the ferry tragedy to last at least until next month. The monthly index is a gauge of the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. A reading over 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, while Korea has one of Asia's fastest growing economies, its rapidly aging population stands as an obstacle to growth down the road. To provide the growing number of elderly a stronger safety net, the government will require all companies in the nation to offer their employees private retirement plans in 8 years' time. That's part of the plan announced by Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan following an economic ministerial meeting on Wednesday. By 2016, all companies with 300 or more employees would be required to subscribe to a retirement pension program. And by 2022, the provisions would extend to all companies regardless of size. Choi stressed private pension plans and state-run programs need to be strengthened to meet the increased demand due to Korea's aging population. He added that the government would ease some current regulations on retirement pension funds to improve their operating profitability.
Now, the floor leadership of the ruling Saenuri Party will hold a second round of face-to-face talks with the families of the victims of the Seoul ferry disaster this Wednesday afternoon to further discuss the special bill aimed at uncovering the exact causes of that tragic sinking. They are expected to thrash out how to overcome the main unresolved issues, especially on whether to give the families more say in selecting the list of candidates to lead the special council investigation. At a meeting earlier this week, the ruling party and the families merely confirmed their vast differences. The ruling party has so far rejected the families' demand of giving them the authority to select the committee themselves. The passage of the special bill has been stuck in political limbo for more than 3 months now and is holding up a slew of other pending and very pressing bills. Turning to the torrential and deadly downpours in southeastern Korea early this week, authorities have now confirmed the deaths of 10 people and say that 4 others remain missing. The body of one victim was recovered Tuesday evening in the basement of a building in the port city of Busan. Search and rescue operations continue as fears mount that those who are unaccounted for may have been swept out into the nearby ocean. More than 240 millimeters of rain fell on the cities of Changwon and Busan on Monday in just about 3 hours. This led to some really rather scary landslides and flash flooding. Japan is going to use government funds to promote the verification result of its landmark apology to the victims of its wartime system of sex slavery. According to Japan's national broadcaster NHK, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said on Tuesday that Tokyo will spend part of its budget to advertise the Kono statement both at home and abroad, following a request by the government. Now, the Kono statement was Tokyo's acknowledgement in 1993 of the Japanese military's involvement in forcing tens of thousands of women and girls, including a great many Koreans, into sexual servitude before and during World War II. Critics said Japan's review of the Kono statement earlier this year suggested the Abe administration wanted to make it look as though the admittance was based on shaky evidence so as to damage the credibility of the apology and lessen its international reputation.
And let's now take a look at some of the international headlines we're following this Wednesday afternoon. For that, our Eunice Kim joins us from the News Center.
Eunice, this latest round of fighting between Israel and Hamas has been the deadliest in years, but a new ceasefire has put a halt to it indefinitely.
That's right, Mark. After some 8 truce deals in this 50-day war, this ceasefire is not attached to a deadline. Thus, it'll allow Palestinians in Gaza to begin rebuilding as leaders from all sides prepare to return to Cairo to work out a permanent truce. Our Son Jung-in has the details.
The long-term truce was announced Tuesday after Israel and Hamas agreed to halt fighting indefinitely, bringing an end to 7 weeks of conflict. The truce brokered by the Egyptian government was reached after 2 days of extensive negotiations in Cairo. The terms of the deal appeared to be almost the same as the one proffered at the beginning of the conflict, easing the blockage of Gaza to allow relief supplies and reconstruction materials to pass through. It also extends the fishing limit to 6 nautical miles from 3 nautical miles. Joyful Palestinians poured into the streets to celebrate. However, fighting continued right up until the truce was declared, with 1 Israeli killed and several injured, according to its officials, while in Gaza, 2 Palestinian children were reportedly killed in an airstrike. Both sides will likely return to Cairo sometime within the next month to address more contentious issues, including Israel's call for militant groups to disarm and Hamas' demands for an airport and seaport in Gaza and the release of Palestinian prisoners. The ceasefire follows at least 8 temporary truces during the course of the conflict that began on July 8th. More than 2,200 people were killed and tens of thousands were left homeless, mostly in Gaza. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And sources say the United States has begun reconnaissance flights over Syria following President Barack Obama's green light on Tuesday. This as the White House is mulling over extending airstrikes to Syria after seeing considerable success in Iraq in holding back Islamic State militants warring for territory against Kurdish Peshmerga forces. The surveillance flights are seen as a mission to obtain additional information as Pentagon officials draft potential options for the president, including airstrikes. Syria, though, has warned Washington not to extend its airstrikes over its airspace if it will be unilateral in nature, underlining that they must be planned in tandem with Damascus. A United Nations cargo helicopter has been shot down in rural South Sudan, killing 3 people on board. The UN says the crew were Russian contractors. 1 survivor was receiving medical help from Doctors Without Borders. The chopper crashed near Bentiu, a hotly contested region between government and rebel fighters who have been fighting since December. The unrest had displaced some 1.8 million people who are receiving food aid from the UN. A spokesman for a state governor said a rebel commander had warned the UN not to fly over that territory last week. The shootdown came 1 day after the warring sides had agreed to work toward a permanent ceasefire and form a national unity government within 45 days. And Korea's foreign ministry has issued a special travel warning to Congo after the Central African state confirmed Ebola deaths. The warning applies to only the northern province of Equator for an initial period of 1 week, up for automatic extension until a cancellation notice is issued. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says more than 240 healthcare workers in West Africa have fallen ill to the hemorrhagic virus, with about half of those cases ending in death. Among those infected was William Pooley, the first Briton to contract the virus in decades. Reports say the volunteer nurse in Sierra Leone received the experimental drug ZMapp as part of his treatment back home in England.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo with Pro.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
While it's widely believed that electronic cigarettes are less harmful than conventional ones, the jury's still out on whether they actually are. The World Health Organization has called for stricter measures on e-cigarettes, warning they could pose a health threat. Kim Min-ji has the details.
More and more people these days are reaching for electronic cigarettes as a way to quit smoking.
If you use electric cigarettes, you will smoke less tobacco.
Although potentially less harmful than traditional cigarettes, there are mounting concerns regarding the health risks of e-cigarettes. And the World Health Organization has drawn up a report calling for stricter regulations. It calls for the prohibition on e-cigarette manufacturers from making unproven health claims, such as they help people quit smoking, until there is convincing scientific evidence to support them. The WHO also urges a ban on the use of e-cigarettes in public places until it is proven that exhaled vapor is not harmful to bystanders. The report also says fruit, candy, or alcoholic drink-style flavors should be prohibited until evidence shows that they're not attractive to teenagers. The report warned that exhaled e-cigarette vapor could increase the levels of toxins and nicotine in the background air and pose a greater threat to teenagers and the fetuses of pregnant women who use the device.
Underlying reasons for regulation are really to impede then the promotion of these products to non-smokers and youth.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a separate report saying that teenagers that have used e-cigarettes were more likely to smoke real cigarettes. The WHO will hold the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in October and discuss the issue with member states. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Chinese manufacturers have recently been loosening Korea's tight grip on the smartphone market, and now industry watchers say they may looking to do that same in another research firm. Display Search says 3 Chinese television manufacturers, Xiaomi, LED TV, and Lenovo, recently released products at extremely low prices, some up to 30% cheaper than similar ones on the market. Xiaomi, for example, is selling a 49-inch ultra-high-definition TV for around $650. Now, comparing this with similar class models offered by Samsung, the Korean company was selling the TVs at a price 4 times higher than the Chinese manufacturer. Now, it's so easy to find a coffee shop on just about every street corner in Seoul, and business continues to boom. One chain in particular is taking up more corners than the rest. The problem is the price of a coffee in a Starbucks in the Korean capital is double what you'd pay in New York City. But as our Connie Kim reports, Koreans are more than willing to pay the extra price.
If you need evidence to support the notion that Korea is crazy for coffee, you only need to look around the streets of Seoul, where a coffee shop can be found on just about every corner. But none have quite the presence that Starbucks has. There are 284 Starbucks coffee shops located in Seoul. Now that's more than you'll find in New York City, Shanghai, London, or Seattle, where the company was founded. Koreans are also paying more for a cup of joe at the chain, $4.85. That's how much Starbucks Korea charges their customers for an average cup of coffee. That's nearly twice as much as customers in the United States pay. For an Americano, the data shows that Korea ranks 6th on the list, behind countries like Poland and Greece. Despite the steep prices, Starbucks customers here in Korea say they're happy to pay.
Starbucks has been in Korea for ages, so I trust them. There are a lot of Starbucks, so they are easy to find. I'd like to know why the prices keep going up, but I'll continue going.
It appears that Koreans, generally speaking, are willing to shell out a little extra for a cup of coffee, no matter where it comes from. Starbucks prices are right on average with the prices found at domestic coffee chains. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, on to some tech news. If you have an Android smartphone, someone may very well be eavesdropping on your conversations. But help is just a click away, fortunately, to counter at least a dozen new spy applications that have been developed by unscrupulous individuals and groups. Korea's National Police Agency says it has developed its own app, the Pol Anti-Spy Program, which is available free of charge on Google's App Store, Play Store, detects spying applications and automatically deletes them. from your phone. The police say they'll continue to keep an eye out for the spy applications until at least the end of October. Birth rates have been falling in nearly every developed country in the world for years, but even against this grim backdrop, Korea stands out, and not in a positive light. And the problem is only worsening by the year, unfortunately. If the trend continues, experts say Korea's super low birth rate will inevitably impact the labour force, and that could severely limit room for economic growth in the decades to come. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
It's becoming harder to hear the crying of newborns in Korea. The nation's birth rate has been on a steady decline over the past 40 years. Currently, it has the lowest birth rate among the 34 OECD member countries. Last year, the number of newborns stood at 436,500, a near 10% decrease from 2012. This means about 8.6 babies were born among a population of 1,000, the lowest since the year 1970, when the government first began recording population data. The age of pregnant mothers, meanwhile, is getting higher, which is one of the main contributing factors for the country's low birth numbers. Last year, the average age of mothers who gave birth was 31.8 years old, 0.2 year older than the previous year. 1 in 5 of them were aged 35 or older. The Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs says the low birth rate trend will affect the labor force in the long run. The number of able workers between the ages of 15 to 64 is estimated to stand at 37.2 million in 2016 and is expected to steadily decrease to less than 9.5 million people by the year 2100.
The country's labor productivity will greatly fall with the growing rise of the aging labor population, as there are less newcomers joining the workforce.
The researcher emphasized the need to come up with comprehensive measures to ease the burdens families face when raising children, particularly policies that would help parents balance work and family life. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, the latest discovery of nearly 80 Buddhist artifacts on the outskirts of Seoul was revealed to the public last week. They are among some of the finest preserved and historically important pieces related to Northeast Asian Buddhism. Our Song Ji-son has this report.
At the entrance of a trail leading to summit of Dobongsan Mountain in northern Seoul sits Dobongseowon. During Korea's Joseon dynasty, which spanned more than 500 years until the late 19th century, Dobongseowon acted as an institute for educating young scholars and remembering historic ones. This particular institute was dedicated to Jo Gwang-jo, a Confucian scholar who pursued radical reforms in the early 16th century. But recent discoveries at the site have people, historians in particular, looking even further back to the Goryeo dynasty, which ruled most of the Korean peninsula between the 10th and 14th century. A total of 77 Buddhist artifacts from the Goryeo era have been discovered here at Dobongseowon, a site that functioned as a Confucian academy during the Joseon dynasty. The site, currently being restored, is set to be reopened next year. Among the dozens of artifacts excavated, one very sophisticated piece that's unique to the Goryeo era stands out. It's this Kumgangnyeong, a bell used in Buddhist ceremonies during prayer chants. It's the first known piece in which the 4 heavenly guardians and the 5 great kings are engraved on one instrument, a first not just in Korea, but in other Northeast Asian countries where Buddhism has roots. Although these artifacts were found at an institute that was used during the Joseon dynasty, at a time when Buddhism was suppressed to foster Confucianism, they were not hidden or destroyed.
Before transforming into an institute, the site was used as a temple in the Goryeo era. It is assumed that these artifacts were buried as part of a ceremony to pay respect to the Buddha. These were found inside these larger pots, which helped to preserve their original shapes and materials relatively well.
The preliminary report on these artifacts will now be handed over to art historians, who will conduct further studies and look for clues about Buddhist practices during the Goryeo era. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
Outbreaks of rain are in store for the southern regions today. Up to 60 millimeters of more showers are in store for the Jeollado provinces and Jeju Island into tomorrow, which could be accompanied by thunder and lightning. And other regions could see mix of sun and clouds, including here in Seoul. And depends on where you are, you could see a bit higher temperatures or cooler or similar daytime highs as yesterday. So let's take a closer look. The daytime high in the capital will rise to 30, while Daegu and Gwangju will make it to 28, and Busan will hit 26 later on. Now, for other regions, it looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon will top out at 26 and 28 respectively, and Dokdo should see high of 22 later in the day. Well, it's important to be aware of the big temperature gap now. Overnight lows in the capital are dipping into the low 20s, but the high will be jumping into the low 30s. So please take good care of yourself to avoid getting sick. Well, that's all from me today, and back to you, Mark and Jin-joo in the studio.
Thank you, Jian, for the weather, and that's about it for this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon.
Yes, hope you have a fabulous day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.
Thank you for watching.